Like that's crooked. Good morning, everybody. Just trying to get this set up here. What's going on? Just starting a couple minutes early here. Give people enough time to know we're online. And good to see everybody. Whether you're online now or later. Now, if you are online now, please do us a favor and share this video. Give us some likes, interact a little bit. Let us know where you're watching from. And I've got my stuff pulled up here. And so pop in, say hello, let us know where you're watching from. And I'm gonna mute that real quick, but we'll get started here in just a couple minutes. But always love the opportunity to do look ahead. So I'll talk about a couple different things, I guess, as it relates right now to the show notes. So you got your connection card, obviously, up top. And, for those of you that may jump on and check this out, or, maybe one of you that are our regulars are going to share this. So for that friend that's going to pop on a little bit later, the connection card is a great opportunity for us to connect with you and send you some stuff that's helpful once a month. To your email, and just your email. It's just your email and your name. We get it. Church connection cards, and ours too. Before we went digital, our connection card had like first name, last name, phone number, date of birth, address, social security number, Visa card number. No, I'm just kidding. We didn't have all that, but it was a lot of stuff, And when we kind of rolled into this season, we're like, you know what? Let's just ask for their name and their email address because I got to thinking about it. I'm like, man, if I go to a restaurant and they ask me for anything other than my email address, I'm probably not going to give it to them. But that's something we'd love to put some helpful stuff in your inbox, obviously. The other is the Next Steps form. Especially if you're new, our church, really my passion is we want to see people make steps. We want to lead people in a growing relationship with Jesus. So, whether you've been saved for 15 years, 5 years, 10 years, 5 months, or 5 weeks, we want to help you take your next steps in a growing relationship with Jesus. And so that Next Steps form is really just two options on that. There's Multiply Discipleship, which I love because it just gives you a good grasp on, hey, what does it mean to be a follower of Jesus? Like, what are we? What do we do? Like, what is it? What isn't it? What's really kind of the crux for us? And then, of course, there's community groups. And obviously the holiday season, like for instance, our group, we're just doing 2 fellowships over these months because our couples are crazy busy. We do have another Bible study group led by 2 great guys in our church that meets every Wednesday. And I'm getting a little bit too much into this stuff, but I just wanted, as I'm talking about the Next Step form, there's really 2 options. There's community group, and then there is the Multiply Discipleship, or like one-on-one type discipleship. And each of those, I believe, are great, because you're either gonna grow in your relationship with Jesus in the context of community and knowledge in relationship. And so we try not to make anything too curriculum, too stifling structure type stuff, but we also understand it's great to have, like a weekly meeting with somebody. And so we got that for you as well. Then, of course, for those of you that are regular supporters, I'm going to talk a little bit about this in the message today, but there is the online giving aspect, and I'll speak candidly. We're struggling in that area, and so what I would say is, if you're a friend of mine and you're in ministry, I would love to know if you'd be willing or have the opportunity to maybe help us continue with some stuff we're doing here. For those of you that attend our church and love our church, but have not given, man, we need your support in that way. We need your partnership in that way. And got some great stories of meeting people in the week this week. Share a prayer request with you. 1, pray for a guy named Jeff. 2, pray for 2 ladies, Victoria and Jocelyn. And had a great meeting with them, got to know them a little bit. And so, and I say that in the context of, right now, sometimes people feel like if there's not a building, there's nothing to give to. And, our church has never really paid for buildings. We paid like $500 a month for a building when we were in it. And really all the money has really gone towards this sort of stuff, like allowing me to get out in the neighborhoods, help make disciples, talk with people, but also for you as well. And so would highly encourage you in that regard. Obviously, being generous, part of discipleship is giving. And I'm sure we're not the only church in this situation, but I want to let you know about that. So if you can give, the giving link is on there as well. And I love practicing that aspect of discipleship with you. Giving is not something I encourage people to do because I'm the pastor. It's something I encourage people to do because I do it. And you see God's faithfulness. You get to demonstrate, talk about walking by faith, right? What more way can you walk by faith than taking 10% of your income and giving it towards an eternal kingdom work? That most people in the world say that doesn't make sense. And unfortunately, too many Christians say that doesn't make sense. But that's walking by faith, right? We don't give because we're going to get. We don't give because, we're looking to see something happen necessarily. We give because, one, we're commanded to. We give because we want to make sure that our heart is more anchored to our church's mission, anchored to the gospel, anchored to eternity. And so don't forget to do that. So, well, look, it's 9:02. And just a couple of things, not really a lot to share with you this morning. Obviously, at 10 a.m., just about an hour from now, we're going to be preaching part 3 of our Supremacy of Christ message. And so excited about that message. I think you're going to get a lot. We're really just talking about our role and the gospel. And so we're going to learn what the gospel is. We're going to talk about what we're supposed to do with it. And you're gonna get a lot out of the message today. I really believe we'll kind of be in a couple different passages, but I always try when we do that. I always try to handle it in a way that doesn't seem like we're just building a case somewhere out there and then just saying, "Hey, believe this," So it's really knit to the core central theme. So let me encourage you right now. Maybe share this video. Let somebody know, "Hey, this is coming up. I want you there." Do a watch party, as we've talked often. And just never forget, sometimes, because especially if you've been a regular and, we've been out of a meeting place for nearly a year. And I don't know, it's wearing on me. I'll be honest with you. It's wearing on me a little bit. And I know it's wearing on you because sometimes we tie so much of, our church is this and we're doing this and we're able to do this. We can anchor so much of that into a building and a gathering that we forget this right here is a gathering. And certainly, it's it's great to meet in person, but this is a gathering. And with that in mind, we ought never to forget that this is an opportunity to bring someone into a gathering. And so invite somebody into our church's gathering at 10 a.m. We're literally gathering with people all over Orange County. And so make this shareable, make it available, do a watch party, share it in the week, and let's... Hey, morning, Miss Debbie. Good to see you. Sorry if I'm delayed on these. They pop up, randomly and stuff like that. I got this crazy notification that's just gonna drive me crazy on my phone. Wish I could put my notifications on silent while I'm doing this, but it is what it is. But like I was saying, 10 a.m. This morning, we're going to be back in the book of Colossians, so be sure to share that. Again, share it in the week. You just never know. You never know, who may watch because you invited them. And then here's the other thing, and I try to mention this every week, don't forget to invite them to invite someone. And sometimes I think we think like just, if I can just get them to come, and we forget, they have somebody that they're influencing too. And I'll just tell you this, every time I talk to somebody about maybe praying with them or coming back and maybe starting a Bible study or coming along with me on something, I'm always like, "Hey, do you know somebody that might want to come with us and learn more about this?" And it's just a simple ask. You really have no idea if it's going to be positive or negative, but really that doesn't matter, right? Because that's what walking by faith is. We're just trying to do that. So don't forget, invite somebody and then encourage them to invite somebody. You never know what may come out of that. And that could be an exciting story here in the next couple of weeks. Then, of course, let's see, we've got November 18th, which is this Wednesday. We've talked about this for a while. Our group is hosting our little bit of a Thanksgiving, pre-Thanksgiving kind of thing, and we got some friends from our group coming. We got some new friends that we've made as well, and so very excited about having some people over that are new to our church. And are going to be an opportunity for you to meet, and they want to meet you. It's interesting because when you talk to people about having a church that's just not really meeting in person as much, it's been interesting to see people say, okay, but you guys are still, you're still doing ministry, you're still trying to reach people, and they're like, oh yeah, totally. And then just say, hey, why don't you come and meet some of us? And they're excited. And I would say, hey, if you're a part of our church, this ought to be exciting for you. I wouldn't let anything, in other words, I would let nothing keep me from coming to this on November 18th. And it's going to be, I believe at 6:30, 6:30 this Wednesday. And so everything in the day is done. The only excuse you really have is your favorite Netflix binge. And so I'm just going to say again, I wouldn't let anything. If you're associated with Inland Hills, meaning you watch every week, you go to group, or you check us out once a month, or you watch 2 messages a week, I would say, I'm talking to you, I would say don't let anything, I would not let anything keep me from gathering back in person and just having some pumpkin pie, some chocolate, hot chocolate, some coffee. It's going to be an awesome time. Man, we need the community more than ever. As I've always said, circles are better than rows. Community is better than congregation, And so we're going to have a fantastic time. It's not going to be overly long. You will probably be back home by 8 o'clock. But we need each other. We're going to have a great time. This is an excellent time. We're going to be above board with the safety. So you don't have to worry about that. Mask, if you want to wear those. If you got hand sanitizer, we'll have all that. We'll have everything thought of, everything thought through in that regard. Nobody's touching anything, all that sort of stuff. But you know what? You go to grocery stores and all the sorts of stuff now anyways. And so don't let media and don't let people convince you that church is a more dangerous place to go as it relates to the coronavirus. We're going to have a good time. So don't forget, mark your calendar, 6:30 this Wednesday night. November 18th. If you want directions and where we're meeting at, all you got to do is message me here, direct message me on Facebook, send our church an email, info@inlandhillsoc.com, and we'll get that information to you as well. But don't let anything stop you from being here. So excited. It's been a lot of work getting new people to want to come in and be a part of this, and much relational investment on my part, my wife's part, and others in our church as well. And so that's going to be a good time. And then of course, and this is the last thing, rolling down on time here, is just the end of the month. The end of the month gathering is going to be the last Sunday in November. And again, I know some of you are going to be traveling. You won't be back in. Obviously, no gathering with our church is ever meant to make somebody feel bad. But man, we want you there. And so if you're in town, plan to be a part of that. And we're going to be in Colossians. Actually, let's see. What's today? Today is what is today? Today's the date. Somebody help me out. Today is the 15th, so the 22nd, so it'll be the 29th. The 29th at 10 a.m., we're going to be meeting in person. And so if you want directions on where we're meeting, again, drop it in the comments. We'd love to meet you there and fellowship with you as well. And that'll be at 10 a.m. But of course, if you can't make it, then we're going to be posting this online. And so this is a great opportunity to invite a friend to. Again, we'll be as safe as we can. Mask, hand sanitizer, and if you feel you need to wear that, then we'll have that available for you. And so that will be coming up the last Sunday of November. And then I'll just put this out there again. Last Sunday in December, we're going to be meeting. And again, I know it's a little bit of a weird holiday type time frame, and that's why we're letting you know about it now. So you can go ahead and put it in the calendar. And I mentioned this I think 2 weeks ago, but I wanted to just mention it real quick before we go. Is if you have family coming in, just be a Christian. Be a Christian. Never be ashamed. We're going to talk about this in the message today. Never be ashamed of the gospel. If you've got friends or family that's coming in, never underestimate the power of this season where you can say, hey, you know what? Our church isn't really meeting, and so if it's the last Sunday, tell them to come, or tell them you're going, and just be bold in that way. You never know how God may use that testimony in that individual or that family member's life. And so if it's the last weekend of December, and there's all this, there's all these parties and stuff going on, just let them know, hey, we're going to church, that Sunday morning. Tremendous example my parents always set for me, And without making anybody feel bad about it, but we just let, people would know, like, yeah, we went to church, even on holidays. But then the other thing is, right, is if you're saying, okay, I want to spend time with my family, they're not going to go, then be bold enough to say, hey guys, our church is having an in-person today, but obviously we want to spend time with you guys, and you might not be comfortable, but we're going to watch them on YouTube, and we're going to listen to our pastor. He's going to preach a helpful, relevant message for 30 minutes. And you guys know me, we're going to preach the Bible. We're going to do it with grace, with love, truth. And but just I wanted to kind of prepare us for the holiday season, because some of you guys might have somebody coming over, somebody traveling out, or you may be going somewhere. And you know what? You're going to be like, okay, it's noon, we're about to eat lunch, I'm on the East Coast, but my church at 9 a.m., 10 a.m., and 1 o'clock this time, we're going to get everybody around, and we're going to just watch a 30-minute message, or at some point we're going to say, hey, our church is doing this online, and we want to hear the message and stay tracking with Colossians. And so just putting that out there, some ideas as you get ready to head into the holiday season. Come if you can come, and don't let other people stop you from coming. But then also, if you're there, you can bring church to them, which is an incredible opportunity we have to do. And of course, your giving makes all that possible as well. So we appreciate that. Well, that's all I got, guys. Thanks so much for hanging out. Looks like me and Miss Debbie were the duet today. Oh no, Jennifer was on there. She just didn't say hey, and that's okay. But share the video, guys. We'll see you at 10 a.m. It's going to be a great message, and we'll look forward to seeing you next Sunday, 9 a.m. right here for a look ahead with the pastor. If you have any questions about anything, let me know. You can always direct message me, put it in the comments. I'll follow back up with that here later this afternoon and try to get back that information to you. And so God bless, guys. Looking forward to seeing you at 10 a.m. It's going to be awesome. Watch party, invite a friend, and we'll see you very soon. God bless. Hey, good morning and welcome everybody to Inland Hills Live. I am so glad that you have decided to jump online this morning, or maybe it's at some point later in the week. Either way, we're glad that you're here. And as always, we want to say good morning and welcome to those who may be our first time viewers or second time viewers. We are so appreciative of anyone jumping online and watching this content that we really believe will be a blessing. But if this is your first time, I want to extend a very special thank you and welcome. Our church really exists to lead people into a growing relationship with Jesus. And so I really do believe and really have been praying that this content would be a blessing and help you take that direction in case you're maybe new to church or exploring faith. And so glad that you're here. Two things I wanted to draw your attention to this morning, especially if you're a first or second time viewer, are the connection card and the next steps form that are really located in the show notes that may be above me, to the left of me, to the right of me, depending on the platform that you're watching on. And each of those forms, the connection card is simply just your name and an email address. We would love to send you some helpful content throughout the week. And then of course the next steps form is exactly that. I know oftentimes people will check out a church online before they really attempt to do something with them in person. And so we understand that may be why you're here. And so we wanted to maybe answer your maybe unspoken question at the moment of, okay, Isaac, what's next? Well, it's the next steps card. And really for us, we believe that discipleship is really what it's all about. And we believe that happens in two spheres or two situations really. And that would be a one-on-one discipleship where you can maybe grab some coffee and talk with someone and explore and ask questions, express doubts, and hopefully find answers to your search for faith. But then also, it's the opportunity for you to get involved in community. And as we've talked about many times throughout our church history, we really do believe that circles are better than rows. And so I'd encourage you to take one of those two next steps as we get started this morning. For all of us this morning, it's a great weekend to be online with us. We again are in now our third message of several messages that we will be in the next probably few months in the book of Colossians. And so you can actually go ahead and open up. We've been in the first several verses of Colossians for the past 2 weeks. And I'm telling you, I love preaching through the Bible. I love preaching verse by verse. I love just kind of mining out some of the content that the Apostle Paul or the early church, New Testament writers and Old Testament writers, I just love to get into the Word and really just see what they're saying versus trying to pick a bunch of different topics. And I don't know about you, but I feel like sometimes I know when I'm out of my depth. And I'll be honest with you, with all the political stuff, I mean, I've got theories, you've got theories, we've all got opinions, we've all got the things that, we just know we're sure we should be doing right now. But I'll be honest with you, when you take the scope of things and the breadth of things, I'm going to be honest with you, I'm out of my depth. And so I'm not going to be able to come up with the topic that's just going to resonate right with you. And so thankfully, as a preacher of the Bible, there is an endless supply, there's an endless surplus that's available for you and me to dig through and really benefit from what God was telling people that lived thousands of years ago in some difficult times, in some trying times. And I know that what we're going to talk about this morning is going to be a great benefit to you because it's been a great benefit to me. And really what we're going to talk about is the gospel. And we talk about that every week, I suppose, the good news of Jesus. But today we're going to talk about the good news, the gospel of Jesus, because as Paul writes to these believers, again, we've talked about how he's really pushing, or maybe I guess I would say pulling them away from syncretism, which is, this guy's a Jew and I'm going to do what he does to make my Christianity better, or that person's a Hindu. And so they were blending, religious cultures to enhance maybe their walk with Jesus. But then also there were many who were beginning to put their hope in the empire and the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire, just incredible, 1,500 years of reigning. The American is in their 244th year of existence. And, but talking to an American, you'd think we'd been around forever. We've been ruling this thing since, the dawn of time. But the Roman Empire was incredibly powerful, incredibly influential. As we talked about several weeks ago, we still borrow much from their law system, their legal system. And in fact, there are parts of that area in the world that still use bridges and roads that they built. The empire was just massive, incredibly influential. And so many people were beginning to shift eyes from Jesus and begin to shift their eyes to the empire. And Paul, again, going to not use, but is going to certainly teach and proclaim the gospel so that these individuals would not be enamored by the empire and not be confused into adopting other religions, as many during that day would have done. But I find oftentimes that we can struggle with what to do with the gospel. Certainly you know the gospel, and I'm going to define that for us today, but you may be watching and you've heard about the gospel, and maybe Christianity to you is more religion than it is relationship, and maybe you've heard people say Christianity is a relationship, not a religion, and you're like, what in the world does that even mean? Because, if we're being honest, Christianity kind of is a religion, right? And so Paul is going to help you and I explore, what do we do with the gospel? What should we be doing with the gospel? Because sometimes what happens, and Paul certainly, as he writes this letter, we should acknowledge this, that he's helping course correct some things in the early church. And as Paul planted churches, churches begin to grow, they begin to see other people saved, but inevitably they would see people come in to those churches, or people from within those churches would begin to believe things like we're talking about this morning, syncretism, and then there was early Gnosticism, and there were just these heresies that began to erupt inside these small churches, these local churches, and begin to erode at the fabric of the gospel. And so in many ways, as you read the New Testament scriptures, if you want to kind of huge broad brush way to read the gospels in the early church letters, is to think of it that way, is that as that Paul had planted these churches, and certainly not every church, but he plants these churches, he goes away to start other churches, and then he begins to hear reports back about some issues that were beginning to develop in these churches. And so the letters that he writes, and in a lot of ways, are course corrections for those churches and teaching them about the gospel and dealing with some major sins. And this is so helpful for us because we tend to do the wrong things with the gospel. We tend to do things wrong with our religious views and our Christianity. What we can do, and especially during this season, right, with the political, some of us, we look at the Bible and we see that Jesus gives us, rules. He gives us things to do, and he gives us things to obey. And we're like, okay, that's cool. I like rules. I'm a rule person. We think, you take these rules, and the more conservative, the better, right? The more conservative, the better. In fact, we're going to go so far as to say, okay, Jesus gave us these rules, but I'm going to add my own rules because that's just better. Conservative is good, and I'm going to try to move right on the camera here, okay? Conservative is good, but real conservative is better. And real conservative is good, but really, really conservative is even better. And we can begin to move in a direction to where we are right of God. Where we're right of God, where we're more conservative than Jesus is. And we can, if we're not careful, we can get to this place to where we start looking at Jesus and we're like, yeah, Jesus is a good guy, but, he didn't wear a suit and tie, and he wore sandals, and he's got long hair, and I'm going to be honest with you, he kind of looks like a hippie. That Jesus guy needs to get his act together. He needs to clean himself up, and we can be move to the right of God. And I'm telling you, if you find yourself moving to the right of God, you need to move back over to where Jesus is. But then, of course, right, and we talk about course corrections, we can look at, some churches where Paul was writing to, where there's this whole other side, and it's, everybody's right, there's no truth, there's nothing to worry about. We just believe in this que sera, sera, this universality of salvation, and no one's going to be punished, no sin's not going to be judged. And we can go down this road because Corinthians went down that road. I mean, they were like, wow, grace is so awesome, and wow, it's just so wonderful, and wow, look, that guy right there, he's marrying his mom. This is wonderful. And Paul's like, no, it was just like, wow, the early church had some major issues, and you had both of these types of people in the early churches, and I'm willing to bet maybe you've fallen, or maybe you are, or maybe you sit in one of those two camps when it comes to Jesus. And so again, the course correction needs to happen in our life. We've all need some things that have needing adjustment in our life. And today, as we think about the gospel,
I want to kind of, with Paul, course correct. Because if we're not careful, we can think that the gospel is just good news for us. And we don't really know how maybe we fit into the plan or the scope or the mission, if you will, of the gospel. And that's really what Paul's talking about in verses 3 through 8 of Colossians. Let's read this together, okay? He says, we always thank God the Father, our Lord Jesus Christ, when we pray for you, since we heard of your faith in Christ Jesus and of the love that you have for all the saints because of the hope laid up for you in heaven. Of this you have heard before in the word of truth, the gospel, which has come to you, as indeed the whole world it is bearing fruit and increasing. Now, we're going to read on down through verse number 8. It goes on, he says, as it does also among you since the day you heard it and understood the grace of God in truth, just as you learned it from Epaphras, our beloved fellow servant. He's a faithful minister of Christ on your behalf and has made known to us your love in the Spirit. Now, we're going to spend a couple weeks in these verses here, but really, if you look at the crux of this passage, what's Paul talking about? And you're going to find that in verse number 5. He says, because of the hope laid up for you in heaven, of this you have heard before in the word of truth, the gospel. And in these verses, Paul is really just talking about the gospel. And it's so fascinating because where Paul starts in this passage and in this segment of passages, as he gets ready to talk about the gospel, look what he says. Now, before this, we know he says to the faithful, he says what? To the saints and faithful brethren at Colossae. And then the next statement he makes is so odd. Because in verse 3, he says what he says, we always thank God the Father, our Lord Jesus Christ, when we pray for you. And isn't it amazing to where he says to the saints and faithful brethren at Colossae, the people that he thanks are not the Colossians, and it's not the believers, and it's not the saints, and it's not the faithful brethren. He thanks God. Because the gospel, our faith, our belief, the grace, the mercy, the compassion, the love, the forgiveness, the righteousness that you and I receive in Christianity is a gift from God. Their faith was from God. Their love is from God. Their hope is from God. The truth is from God. The fruit is from God. The grace is from God. The learning of the gospel is from God, though it involved Epaphras. And we see the faithful ministers are from God. God is the one who's thanked. The Colossians are not thanked. Epaphras is not thanked. Because Paul understands the grace and the hope and forgiveness and fruit that you and I experience in our lives, the good things that happen for us at work, and the trials we go through, and the difficulty we go through, and the blessings financially or faith-wise, or whatever it is in our life, and the kids that we have, and the obedience that they demonstrate, and the blessing of our marriage, and the ups and downs within our marriage are from God. God is in charge. God is ordering. God is sovereign in the affairs of men, as we talked about a few weeks ago. But Paul thanks God, not the Colossians, because everything that was being reported back that was good, everything that was being reported back in light of the church plant was from God. James, the half-brother of Jesus, said it this way. He says, every good and perfect gift cometh from above, from the Father of lights, with whom is no variableness, neither shadow of turning. So the gospel is from God. And so if we're going to land on the right side, if we're going to course correct correctly with the gospel, it's important to remember that the gospel is from God. The grace is from God. The forgiveness is for God, because that means that whatever God shows us and reveals to us and teaches us about what we're to be doing with the gospel is the direction that we want to lead our lives, the direction we want to move in our lives. But of course, we want to define the gospel, don't we? Certainly the gospel is just the word that means good news. Euangelion is the Greek word, and it is this heralding forth of good news. And something important to know, especially if you're not a follower of Jesus, is that Christians didn't create this word. Christians simply apply this word to the message of Jesus. And the word gospel was something that, as you would have conflict and war, and certainly during the Roman Empire you had skirmishes and battles and taking ground, and so you would have these conflicts in cities, and warriors would step out front and they would do the job, and they would take ground, and they would conquer, and they would overtake, and they would win ground for the Roman Empire. But of course this would be universally applied to kingdom conflicts and other skirmishes, not simply Roman. But the point was, is there would always be not an ambassage, but there would be a messenger that was dispatched. And when over the hills and down in the valley where the battle is taking place, they would begin to see this side is beginning to overtake the other side. The opposition is winning, or the defenders are winning, and they would say, okay, it looks sure. It looks like this is going to be a win. We can declare this a victory. We're going to dispatch our messengers, and they're going to hightail it on their carriage or their horse or whatever. They are going to declare victory back to the home front. They're going to go back to the empire and back to the villages and back to the cities. And on their way in, as they begin to crest over the hill, people from that village and people from that township would look out, and they could tell immediately what was happening on the battleground, because the person would maybe be waving perhaps a white flag, or perhaps they'd be waving their flag, or perhaps they'd be waving no flag, and the demeanor on the face of the individual would communicate all they needed to know about the message that was being brought. But no doubt, whenever those kingdoms would clash, and they would be in battle, and it would be raging, and that kingdom that was beginning to notice they're victorious and they're overtaking the other kingdom, they would dispatch that messenger, and as that messenger would come over the hilltop, you would see the face of a smile and perhaps waving their nation's flag or their kingdom's flag, and instantaneously everybody in the township would know, we've done it. Our warriors have done it. They have won the victory. They're coming back, and there would be massive celebration throughout the town because they know that they are victorious. And so that word euangelion is that I bring good news and I declare victory over this kingdom, is declaring victory over this kingdom. And so as Paul would often write these letters, he would adopt and he would take this letter that people would universally recognize, a defeat of a kingdom by another kingdom. And Paul would apply this, and Christians would use this language that was very empirish to describe the good news of Jesus, because when Jesus died on the cross, he died in your place and in my place. And friend, it was a definitive, declarative victory over the kingdom of darkness. And so that is the good news. Paul clarifies for us in 1 Corinthians 15, verses 3 through 4, specifically what the gospel is. This good news of a kingdom of darkness being defeated by a kingdom of light, a kingdom of lies being defeated by the kingdom of truth, the kingdom of men being overtaken and just destroyed by the kingdom of God, the kingdom of hell defeated by the kingdom of heaven. He says it's this: for I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins according with the scriptures, that he was buried, that he raised on the third day in accordance with the scriptures. That's the gospel. That is what brings defeat from the kingdom of heaven over the kingdom of darkness. And so what are we to do with the gospel? I want to give you 7 things we're to do with the gospel this morning. First of all, we are told to proclaim the gospel. Again, the gospel is something that God has given you and has given me, not just for you and me, but for those around us in our lives. It is given so that you and I can take this and proclaim it everywhere we go. Again, the gospel is not something that was given to us so that we can decide what we want to do with it. We are told to proclaim the gospel. 9 times Paul, throughout his letters, uses this of himself in his ministry to various churches in the New Testament. In Mark 16:15, he says, go into all the world and proclaim the gospel to the whole creation. Secondly, we are to partner in the gospel. We are called to partnership in the gospel. In Philippians 1:5, he says, because of your partnership in the gospel from the first day until now. We are to partner in proclamation. We are to partner through sharing the gospel. We are to partner with one another financially for the furtherance of the gospel. It's always amazing to me as we think about what we're supposed to be doing. People want to talk all the time about, I walk by faith and not by sight. And yet then when we give them crystal clear instruction and biblical instruction about what that means, it's like all of a sudden we're not really sure if we can walk by faith anymore, because people love the idea of a very mystical approach to walking by faith, as if it's like, this exciting thing that God may be wanting me to do. And yet we have to recognize we are called to proclaim the gospel. How do you walk by faith? You proclaim the gospel, because you don't know how someone's going to respond. But it doesn't matter, because you're walking by faith and you're telling other people about Jesus. Secondly, you're partnering in the gospel. You're partnering by going out with your church and praying with people and evangelizing people. You're walking by faith, not because you know how they're going to respond, but because you're called to do. You give in partnership with the gospel, not because it makes sense in the budget, but because you're walking by faith. This is what we do together. We see that we're to labor in the gospel. To labor in the gospel. Philippians 1:27 says, striving side by side, or for the faith of the gospel. You and I are called to labor in the gospel. This means that we're to put work and effort and our mind and certainly our resources and our gifting and all that we can to labor in the gospel, to make sure that the several million people in the Orange County area, the 1.8 million people in a 5-mile radius of Inland Hills Baptist Church, we are laboring, working hard. We are sweating. We're wiping sweat from our brow. We are tired. We are exhausted. We are working, and not in an unhealthy way, in a illogical way, in a detrimental way to our families, but we are working and laboring together in the gospel. This is what we do with the gospel. We proclaim the gospel. We're to partner in the gospel, and we are to labor in the gospel. Fourthly, and not very popularly, but we are called to suffer for the gospel. We have to think, we're going to talk about this over the next few weeks, but as we think about walking by faith, as we think about what we're doing with the gift of the gospel that God has given us, certainly suffering for the gospel is going to happen. It happened to Paul. It happened to Peter. It happened to every single one of the disciples. It happened to Jesus. He suffered for the gospel. And so many Christians and followers of Jesus today want to walk around and pretend like the gospel is never going to cost them anything. It's going to cost everything, because we're called to suffer for the gospel. And Paul, as he writes to this young pastor in 1 2 Timothy 1:8, he says, therefore do not be ashamed of the testimony about our Lord, nor of me as prisoner, but share in suffering for the gospel by the power of God. You want to see the power of God evidenced on your life? Go and suffer for the gospel, because that's what we see declared here. And so we're not talking about trying to just go out and make your life harder than it needs to be. But friend, I'm telling you, as we think about the gospel being given to you and I, we are called to steward the gospel, not in the way in which we think, but in the way in which God prescribes, walking by faith, being more concerned about following Jesus than we are our protection. Think of your counterparts. Think of your brothers and sisters in Christ in Egypt and Iraq and Southeast Asia and in China who are literally doing this today. And how dare we try to pretend that's not happening? And it may not be something that we need to step into. We're called to suffer for the gospel. When the gospel, in the way that God calls us to administer it through and for people, we have to recognize it is a humanistic desire to never experience suffering for the gospel. Fifthly, we see that we're not to hinder the gospel. 1 Corinthians 9:12, if others share this rightful claim on you, do not we even more? Nevertheless, we have not made use of this right, but we endure anything rather than put an obstacle in the way of the gospel of Christ. Friend, let me challenge you this morning. Don't be a hinder to the gospel. Don't be a hindrance to the gospel. Don't be the type of person that is so caustic, that is so unbearable, that is so unfriendly, that is so resenting, that is so hateful, that is so bitter, that God can't use you to bring the gospel into their life. Don't hinder the gospel. Don't hinder the gospel by not proclaiming it. Don't hinder the gospel by not partnering in labor and finances with your local church to spread the gospel. Don't hinder the gospel by unwilling to take time out of your week and disciple another young believer. Don't be a hindrance to the gospel to ignore your personal relationship with Jesus and to get in the Word and to fast. Don't hinder the gospel. Don't hinder the gospel. And then lastly, next to last, we see don't be ashamed of it. Don't be ashamed of the gospel. An incredible statistic during COVID-19 just shocked me the other day, and I mentioned this briefly in our kind of what's coming up with Pastor video we do Sunday mornings, and it was something like 62% of Christians have said they have not shared their faith during this crisis, during this pandemic. Well, friend, I will guarantee you that more than 60% of Christians shared their views on political issues during this time. I'll guarantee you over 60% of Christians made what they thought about the vaccines and made what they thought about the virus known in the past 6 months. And Inland Hills, I want to challenge us to not be ashamed of the gospel. Now more than ever is the time to not be ashamed of the gospel. Paul, writing from Rome and to the writing from prison, I believe to the believers at Rome, he says, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek." Paul writing this letter from a jail to the Colossians because he's not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And now we have Christians today that are just not sharing their faith because of a pandemic, because of XYZ, because of ABC. Who cares what the reason is? The gospel is not to be ashamed of. And then lastly, this is so powerful because this is going to help with everything we've just said. No doubt you're saying, Isaac, man, everything you're saying is kind of challenging. And if you know me, I'm a challenging individual. I love challenges. And so I'm going to challenge you this morning, but this will help you because not only are we called to proclaim the gospel, not only are we called to partner in the gospel, not only are we called to labor in the gospel, not are we called to suffer sometimes for the gospel, not are we told to not to hinder the gospel and to not be ashamed of the gospel, but we are empowered to preach the gospel. Look at 1 Thessalonians 1 verse 5. It says, "Because of our gospel came to you, and not only in word, but also in power and in the Holy Spirit with full conviction. You know what kind of men we proved to be among you for your sake." Paul expressing to these believers in Thessalonica, the reality is you and I have been empowered. That means power has been put in you and me to preach and proclaim and labor and suffer and not to hinder and not to be ashamed and to preach the gospel of Jesus. And listen, I'm telling you, that is every single person listening to me right now. If you're a follower of Jesus, say, "Isaac, I haven't been to ministry school. I had a bad week in my relationship with Jesus this week. I kicked my dog and I yelled at my coworker. I don't have that ability. I can't speak like you. I don't like getting in front of people like you," and on and on and on. Just roll out the red carpet of excuses that you want to put. And Paul would say, stop. You are empowered to preach the gospel. In Matthew 28 verses 18 through 20, Jesus says, listen, you're to go, win, and baptize people. And you're to teach them to obey the commandments. And he says, "And lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the world." Follower of Jesus, The gospel is not your creation. The gospel is not my creation. The gospel is given to us by God through Jesus. And it is not your or mine prerogative with how and what we do with the gospel. It's the truth. It is the gospel truth. And Paul, as he writes to these believers, he says, listen, you're to proclaim the gospel. You're to partner in the gospel. You're to labor in the gospel. You're to suffer for the gospel. You're not to hinder the gospel. You're not to be ashamed of the gospel. And you've been empowered to preach the gospel. Inland Hills, how are you doing with the gospel that God has given to you? Are you proclaiming it? It doesn't mean you have to get on a street corner and yell at people, but are you proclaiming the gospel? Are you taking time to share the gospel with other people? Are you proclaiming it? Are you partnering in the gospel? Are you partnering with your church? Are you partnering by sharing? Are you partnering by giving? Are you partnering by discipling? Are you partnering by investing? Are you partnering by investing in your own walk with Jesus? Are you partnering by being trained? Are you laboring in the gospel? During this season, with all this craziness, there's one thing that is clear. Make disciples. That never changes for the church. Locations change. Budgets change. Jobs change. Relationships change. People change. The mission never changes. Are you suffering for the gospel? Or are you so protective of yourself that you've told God, I'm not going to put myself in a position. I'm going to avoid suffering for the gospel? Are you hindering the gospel through silence, through your testimony, through your lack of labor, through your lack of training, through your lack of investment? Are you hindering the gospel? Are you being ashamed of the gospel? And are you trying to act like you shouldn't be preaching it because you don't have a certain gifting? Listen, there is certainly a gift of evangelism. But friend, every single follower of Jesus is called to proclaim, to partner, to labor, to suffer, to not hinder, to not be ashamed, and to preach the gospel. Are you walking by faith? Are you willing with the gospel to do these things that God has given us to do and be with the gospel? Maybe there's some course correction that's needed today. Maybe there's some adjustment for you and for me today as we think about the good news of Jesus and our stewarding of the gospel. Friend, thank you so much for being here. Again, if there is, perhaps you may be here today and you may be having questions about a relationship with God, you may be having questions about the gospel, I hope that you'll take an opportunity to fill out the next steps form. If there's a prayer request, there's also a form that you can click on as well and let us know what we can be praying for you about. Thanks so much for being here. Cannot wait to see you next week as we jump right back into these passages and these verses as we continue to explore the supremacy of Christ. God bless. We'll see you next Sunday at 10 a.m. Have a great week.